announcing today a major show of military force in the region.
In a shocking turn of events, the world was thrust into the largest military confrontation in decades when Iran launched a staggering 50 missiles at a U.S. Navy destroyer in the Persian Gulf. For years, tensions have simmered between the U.S. and Iran, with each side maneuvering strategically in the region. But this was a direct, unprecedented escalation that would forever change the balance of power in the Middle East. It all began in the early hours of a quiet morning, when the skies over the Gulf erupted with the unmistakable sound of multiple missile launches. Iran, having warned of growing hostility from foreign powers in the region, declared that the attack was a response to provocative actions by the United States and its allies. As the missiles soared across the horizon, the U.S. Navy destroyer, known for its state-of-the-art defense systems, was caught off guard. The ship, part of a larger task force patrolling the waters, had never encountered such a relentless barrage before. The missiles, all targeting critical points on the destroyer, were fired in quick succession, overwhelming the ship's radar systems and forcing it to engage its defense systems in a desperate attempt to intercept the barrage. The first wave of rockets slammed into the ship's outer hull, creating massive explosions that rocked the vessel. The second and third waves of missiles aimed at the core of the ship, intent on disabling its systems and sinking it. A massive firefight broke out in the air as U.S. jets scrambled to intercept and neutralize any remaining incoming missiles. But time was running out. Despite the ship's advanced technology, the sheer number and accuracy of the Iranian missiles caught the crew in a deadly race against time. The U.S. Navy's Aegis system, known for its impressive interception capabilities, struggled to keep up. The ship's defense systems were stretched to their limits as the missiles continued to rain down. Several exploded on impact, sending plumes of smoke and fire into the air, while others were narrowly avoided. But the U.S. destroyer was far from unscathed. Iran, on the other hand, watched as their missiles struck true. They had been planning this strike for months, with a precise and well-coordinated military operation that stunned the world. The attack came after weeks of escalating threats, with Iran promising that the U.S. would pay a steep price for its interference in the region. As the U.S. Navy scrambled to assess the damage and launch retaliatory strikes, a tense silence settled over the region. For hours, the fate of the destroyer remained uncertain. Was it crippled beyond repair? Had the U.S. Navy lost one of its most advanced ships? The world held its breath as the aftermath of this intense battle began to unfold. Military analysts around the globe were scrambling to understand how a conflict that had been simmering for years could explode into this shocking and unprecedented event. In this video, we dive deep into the incredible details of the attack, exploring what went wrong for the U.S. Navy, the sheer scale of the Iranian assault, and the potential consequences for the future of military strategy in the region. What will this attack mean for the U.S.-Iran relationship? Will this lead to a full-scale war, or can cooler heads prevail? Stick with us as we uncover the truth behind the largest battle in decades. The escalating tensions between the United States and Iran have been a subject of international concern for many years, with both nations engaged in a delicate and often hostile relationship. For decades, the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East has been marked by competing interests, shifting alliances, and occasional clashes. Yet the region has managed to avoid a full-scale war. However, in the lead-up to what would become one of the most intense military confrontations in recent history, a series of events were set into motion that would radically alter the balance of power. The United States, as a dominant naval force in the Persian Gulf, has consistently maintained a heavy military presence in the region, conducting freedom of navigation operations and asserting its influence over the key maritime routes that connect the Gulf to the rest of the world. In the eyes of Iran, this U.S. presence was a constant provocation, seen as a direct challenge to Iranian sovereignty and a tool for Western powers to exert control over the region's vast energy resources. The U.S. Navy's routine patrols and military exercises in the Gulf were often met with warnings from Tehran. But for years, these interactions had been contained to verbal threats and sporadic skirmishes, such as the occasional naval encounter or drone intercepts. However, tensions reached a boiling point in early 2026, following a series of provocative actions by both sides. The catalyst came when the U.S. Navy conducted a massive joint military exercise in the Gulf, involving over 30 ships, including a dozen aircraft carriers and destroyers, as well as dozens of fighter jets and bombers. Iran viewed this show of force as a direct challenge to its authority in the region, and as an attempt to intimidate its allies. Iran, already deeply concerned about its diminishing influence in the region, decided to retaliate with an unprecedented military strike. On the morning of February 10, 2026, just as the U.S. Navy today, naval forces were wrapping up their drills, Iran launched a surprise missile attack on a U.S. Navy destroyer, the USS Hornet, which had been stationed in the Central Gulf. This ship was a key asset in the U.S. military strategy in the region, equipped with state-of-the-art radar and missile defense systems, and capable of launching precision strikes at ground targets. The attack began with a barrage of 50 medium-range ballistic missiles, fired from underground launch sites located deep within Iranian territory. These missiles were equipped with advanced warheads designed to bypass traditional missile defense systems, making them far more difficult to intercept. The USS Hornet, which was patrolling the waters just off the coast of Bahrain, initially detected the missile launches via its radar systems, but the sheer number of incoming projectiles overwhelmed its defensive capabilities. The ship's Aegis combat system, one of the most advanced missile defense technologies in the world, was activated immediately, but it could only intercept a fraction of the missiles. Despite the ship's advanced countermeasures, several of the incoming missiles broke through its defenses and struck the hull. The first wave of missiles caused massive explosions in the ship's outer hull, while the second wave targeted critical systems, including its radar, communication lines, and power supply. The U.S. crew aboard the Hornet was thrown into a state of emergency. With systems failing and fires raging on the deck, the crew fought to contain the damage while simultaneously attempting to launch retaliatory strikes. The battle became a race against time. U.S. Navy fighter jets scrambled to respond, but they were forced to contend with Iranian drones, which had been launched to target aircraft on standby. The Hornet was also engaged in direct combat with smaller Iranian fast attack boats, which emerged from Iranian shores in an effort to finish the job. The situation rapidly escalated into a full-scale confrontation, with military forces on both sides now fully engaged in combat. Iran, for its part, had anticipated a heavy response from the U.S. Navy, but they were prepared. The Iranian missile systems had been strategically positioned to strike at the most vulnerable points of the U.S. fleet. These included not only the USS Hornet, but also other ships that had been operating in the area. Iran had long invested heavily in its missile and drone technologies, and the strike was an indication of the nation's growing capabilities in modern warfare. The international community was left stunned by the scale of the attack. While skirmishes and tensions had long been part of the U.S.-Iran dynamic, the scale of the assault on the USS Hornet sent shockwaves through the global political order. With the U.S. Navy reeling from the initial attack, the threat of further escalations hung over the region. Would this conflict spark a broader war between the two nations? Or could diplomatic efforts prevent a full-scale confrontation? At that moment, the world stood on edge, uncertain of what would come next in this rapidly evolving crisis. As news of the attack spread across the globe, nations from all corners of the world began to prepare for potential fallout. The repercussions of the strike would extend far beyond the waters of the Persian Gulf, and the international community now found itself grappling with a new and unpredictable chapter in the ongoing U.S.-Iran conflict. As the Iranian missile assault on the U.S. Navy destroyer USS Hornet unfolded, it became clear that this wasn't just another skirmish in the ongoing tensions between the two nations. The sheer scale and sophistication of the attack marked a new chapter in the military standoff between the United States and Iran. Iran, for years, had been quietly building up its missile capabilities, carefully watching and learning from the advancements of global powers. The missile systems used in the attack were not only the result of years of investment, but were a direct challenge to the U.S. Navy's dominance in the region. Iran's missile program began in earnest in the late 1980s, when the country, seeking to assert its regional power, began acquiring and developing various missile systems. Initially, the focus was on shorter-range, liquid-fueled missiles, such as the Scud and Shahab series, which were capable of striking nearby targets. However, over the years, Iran's missile arsenal expanded and evolved. By the early 2000s, the country began working on more advanced, solid-fueled missiles, with longer ranges and greater accuracy. The result was the creation of the Fateh 110 and the QADR series, both of which became central to Iran's missile strategy. In the years leading up to the attack on the USS Hornet, Iran had quietly worked to enhance its missile capabilities further, with a focus on both precision and overwhelming numbers. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, played a central role in this effort, using its influence to procure advanced technology from countries such as North Korea and Russia. By 2025, Iran had developed a series of highly accurate, long-range ballistic missiles, capable of evading U.S. missile defense systems. This was the result of years of research, trial and error, and the importation of key technologies, including advanced guidance systems and stealth warheads. The attack on the USS Hornet itself was a culmination of this investment. In the early hours of February 10, 2026, Iran launched a carefully coordinated missile strike that involved 50 missiles, all aimed at key vulnerabilities on the U.S. destroyer. The missiles used were a mix of Shahab 4 and Fateh 313 models, both of which were equipped with advanced warheads designed to pierce through modern defense systems. The missiles were launched from various points along Iran's coastline, using a combination of underground silos and mobile platforms, making it difficult for U.S. intelligence to detect and intercept the launch. The first wave of missiles, numbering around 20, struck the USS Hornet in a devastating fashion. Targeting the ship's radar and communication systems, the missiles caused severe damage, knocking out the vessel's ability to coordinate its defenses effectively. With its radar systems compromised, the Hornet was unable to track and target the incoming missiles, allowing the second wave of strikes to land with precision. The second barrage, composed of 20 additional missiles, targeted the ship's engines and power supply, leaving the destroyer vulnerable to further attacks. The final 10 missiles in the third wave were designed for maximum destruction. These warheads were equipped with a new type of high-explosive fragmentation technology, designed to create a deadly cloud of shrapnel upon impact, disabling the ship's vital systems. The missiles hit the ship in quick succession, causing catastrophic explosions and fires that rapidly spread throughout the vessel. Despite the Hornet's advanced firefighting systems and emergency protocols, the damage was severe. The ship's crew, many of whom were left without communication and radar support, fought desperately to keep the ship afloat and to stem the fires that raged out of control. While the U.S. Navy scrambled to launch defensive measures, including fighter jets and drones, the attack was a clear sign that Iran had advanced beyond its previous missile capabilities. The use of advanced guidance systems and precision targeting was a testament to Iran's growing missile prowess, which had once been underestimated by many experts. Iran's ability to launch such a coordinated and devastating strike caught the U.S. Navy off guard, and the scale of the assault made it evident that Iran was no longer just a regional power. It had become a serious contender on the global stage. In the aftermath of the attack, military analysts around the world were left stunned by the sophistication of Iran's missile systems. What had once been seen as a limited capability in missile technology had now become a serious threat to U.S. and allied forces. The attack on the USS Hornet was not just a military strike. It was a signal to the world that Iran was ready to engage in a new kind of warfare, one that leveraged precision, overwhelming numbers, and sophisticated technology to level the playing field against a much more powerful adversary. The attack also signaled a shift in the broader regional dynamics. For years, the U.S. Navy had operated with relative impunity in the Persian Gulf, but Iran's newfound missile capabilities posed a direct challenge to that dominance. The attack on the Hornet was a wake-up call for the U.S. military, which now had to reassess its strategic position in the region and its ability to defend against such missile threats. This strike not only rattled the U.S. Navy, but also sent a clear message to other nations in the region and beyond. Iran was no longer an adversary to be dismissed lightly. As the missile attack on the USS Hornet unfolded, the confrontation quickly escalated from a regional skirmish into a battle with global ramifications. The U.S. Navy, having been caught off guard by the scale and sophistication of the Iranian assault, had little time to react effectively. The first few moments after the initial impact saw the ship's crew scrambling to contain fires, patch up breaches, and restore order amid chaos. But what happened next would define the future of U.S.-Iran relations and possibly change the landscape of military strategy in the region forever. The Hornet's crew, trained for emergencies and prepared for warfare, initially reacted with impressive discipline, but the sheer scale of the attack caught them off guard. The ship's defensive systems, including the famed Aegis combat system, were designed to intercept enemy missiles, but this attack was unlike anything they had encountered before. The sheer number of missiles, combined with their advanced design, overwhelmed the ship's capabilities. The Aegis system managed to intercept a handful of incoming projectiles, but most of the missiles struck their intended targets. The result was catastrophic. The ship's radar, communication systems, and vital engines were disabled. The U.S. destroyer, one of the most advanced in the fleet, now found itself fighting for survival. The ship's crew had little choice but to fall back on their training, directing emergency efforts to prevent the ship from sinking. The fire suppression systems were engaged, but with the damage to the hull, water began to flood certain compartments, making it difficult to contain the blaze. The captain of the USS Hornet, Commander John Matthews, immediately ordered the evacuation of the most critical sections of the ship, including the engine room and communications center, in order to preserve the lives of his crew. But this was a race against time, and every second counted. Outside, the situation had become increasingly dire. Iranian drones, which had been launched in the wake of the missile barrage, continued to circle the destroyer, looking for opportunities to strike at its remaining defenses. The drones were armed with small, precision-guided explosives, designed to attack the ship's remaining functionality and add to its mounting distress. As the Hornet limped through the Gulf, its crippled defenses could do little against the swarm of Iranian drones. The Iranian military had clearly prepared for this moment, using its own advanced UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle, technology to complement the missile assault. These drones were not only used to scout and provide real-time intelligence on the Hornet's damage, but also to create further chaos in the already crippled U.S. ship. The crew was forced to rely on every last ounce of their training to engage in evasive maneuvers, hoping to buy precious time until reinforcements could arrive. But the U.S. Navy's response was slower than anticipated, partly due to the sheer scale of the devastation inflicted on their flagship. While the Hornet struggled in the Gulf, the Iranian military was quick to capitalize on their success. Having launched their missiles from various hidden locations along the coastline, Iran had already positioned itself to escalate the conflict further. The initial attack had been carefully calculated, but Iran's military leadership knew that such an assault would not go unchallenged. In the days following the attack, Iran continued to demonstrate its growing power, deploying more advanced weaponry and increasing its presence around the Persian Gulf. In particular, Iran began to move additional fast-attack boats and missile-launching platforms into the vicinity, setting the stage for a wider confrontation. While the U.S. Navy scrambled to repair the damage to the Hornet and prepare a response, Iran's military forces initiated a series of additional strikes, hitting nearby U.S. positions with a combination of missiles and artillery fire. Meanwhile, the international community was reeling from the attack, as the implications were far-reaching. The U.S. government, already under pressure to respond, faced a difficult decision. The escalation of hostilities between the two nations threatened to draw in their respective allies, and the global oil markets were already beginning to react to the news of the attack. Prices surged, and analysts feared that this could be the beginning of a full-scale war in the Middle East, with the potential to disrupt vital shipping lanes and affect global trade. The United Nations called for an emergency meeting, urging both parties to de-escalate the situation. But behind the scenes, nations that had long been wary of U.S. dominance in the region saw an opportunity to align themselves with Iran. Russia and China, both eager to reduce the influence of the United States in the Middle East, began offering military and diplomatic support to Iran. These developments only served to heighten the tension, as the U.S. found itself not only dealing with an increasingly aggressive Iran, but also facing pressure from its international allies to avoid a direct military confrontation. The U.S. response came swiftly but cautiously. President Franklin Sanders, facing both domestic and international pressure, authorized the launch of a series of retaliatory strikes. The first wave involved precision airstrikes targeting Iranian missile launchers along the coast. These strikes, conducted by stealth bombers and fighter jets, were designed to cripple Iran's ability to launch further attacks. Simultaneously, the U.S. Navy began preparing for a larger operation aimed at securing its naval presence in the region. The Navy's aircraft carriers, once positioned miles off the coast, were now moving closer to Iranian territory, ready to launch a more sustained air campaign if necessary. This show of force was meant to remind Iran of the U.S. military's overwhelming capabilities. But it was also a way of sending a message to the international community that the U.S. would not back down in the face of provocation. Despite these retaliatory measures, Iran's military was far from subdued. Iranian forces retaliated with renewed missile strikes, launching a barrage of rockets that targeted U.S. military bases in Iraq and Syria, as well as key oil facilities in Saudi Arabia. The Iranian government, led by Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, was adamant that its actions were justified in the face of U.S. interference in the region. The government issued a series of public statements, calling for the removal of U.S. forces from the Middle East, and declaring that Iran would not back down in the face of what they called U.S. aggression. The attack on the USS Hornet was framed as a direct response to years of American interference, and Iran presented the assault as an act of self-defense, aimed at sending a clear message to Washington that its presence in the region was no longer welcome. As the situation continued to unfold, the world watched in anticipation. The Iranian missile strike on the USS Hornet had shaken the foundations of U.S. military strategy in the Gulf, and the consequences of the attack were beginning to ripple across the globe. Political leaders, military analysts, and citizens alike all found themselves asking the same question. Could this be the spark that ignites a broader regional war? The outcome of this confrontation would not only determine the future of U.S.-Iran relations, but would also set the stage for a new era of military power dynamics in the Middle East.